Sergio Leone told Clint Eastwood, "You're just background. I make stars." He gave him worse conditions and never washed his costume. When the film made Clint a legend, what he said to Leon became iconic. It was 1964 and Clint Eastwood was standing in the scorching Spanish desert wearing a poncho that smelled like death and decay. Listening to an Italian director explain through a translator why Clint was completely wrong about everything. Sergio Leone had cast Clint in A Fistful of Dollars after several bigger names turned down the role for various professional and financial reasons. Charles Bronson didn't want to work for peanuts in Spain. Henry Fonda passed. James Coburn wanted too much money for the budget. Clint was Leon's fourth or fifth choice, a television actor from America willing to work cheap for a chance at movie stardom and international recognition. But Leon made it clear from day one that he wasn't impressed with his leading man. In Leon's mind, the director was the artist, the creative force. Actors were just tools, replaceable pieces that moved where he told them to move and said what he told them to say. "You're just the tall guy," Leon said through his translator on the first day of shooting. "I make the stars, you follow directions." Clint had worked with difficult directors before, but Leon operated on a different level. He treated his leading man like an extra who happened to have more screen time. When Clint offered suggestions about his character or a scene, Leon would wave him off dismissively. "No, no, no," Leon would say, not even looking at Clint. "You don't understand cinema. You understand television. This is art. I am the artist. You are the paint." The working conditions were brutal. They were shooting in Almeria, Spain, and the Tabernes Desert, where temperatures regularly hit 110 degrees. The budget was minuscule by Hollywood standards, about $200,000 for the entire film. The crew was skeleton, the equipment was outdated, and the schedule was punishing. But Leon saved his worst treatment for Clint. While the Italian actors got relatively comfortable accommodations and regular breaks, Clint was expected to spend hours in the blazing sun wearing layers of clothing, shirt, vest, poncho that trapped heat against his body. And then there was the costume itself that would become legendary. The poncho that would become iconic, that be recognized instantly by millions of people for decades to come, was never washed. Not once. Not during the entire 6-week shoot of the first film, not during the second film, not during the third. Leone insisted that the poncho looked better dirty, more authentic, more lived in. He refused to allow wardrobe to clean it between productions or even between shooting days. By the third film, the poncho was so filthy it could practically stand up on its own. The smell was unbearable. A mixture of sweat, dust, cigar smoke, and Spanish desert sand ground into every fiber. "It has character now," Leon said, gesturing at the filthy sweat-stained poncho with obvious satisfaction. "It has history. It tells a story. This is what makes it real. American studios would wash it every day and it would look fake. This looks lived in. This looks like a man who was killed. You want Disney or you want art." Clint pointed out that it also had an unbearable smell and was starting to grow things in the folds. Leon shrugged. "You want to be a movie star. This is the price. Wear it." The cigar Clint smoked in his iconic squint was Leon's idea, but not out of any collaborative spirit. Leon needed something to cover the lower half of Clint's face because he decided Clint's mouth moved wrong when he talked. The squint was partly Clint's choice, necessary to see anything in the brutal desert sun, but Leon took credit for it later, calling it his directorial vision. Leon also refused to call Clint by his name on set. It was always the tall guy or the cowboy or just pointing and snapping fingers when he needed Clint in position. Through the translator, Leon would bark directions. "Tall guy, stand here. Don't move. Don't think, just stand." When Clint tried to discuss his character's motivation for a scene, Leon laughed in his face. "Motivation. This is a Western, not Stanislavski. You look mysterious. You shoot the gun. You ride the horse. What motivation? I'm trying to understand who this character is," Clint said patiently. "What drives him? Why does I drive him?" Leon interrupted. "I am the director. I tell you what the character does. You do it. That is all." The other actors, mostly Italian and Spanish, were more compliant with Leon's dictatorial style. They were used to directors who treated actors as puppets, but Clint was American, trained in a different tradition where actors collaborated with directors. The clash of approaches created constant tension. In America, Leone told the crew loudly enough for Clint to hear, "They think actors are important. They give them power. This is why American films are garbage now. Actors who think terrible." But despite Leone's dismissive treatment, despite the brutal conditions, despite the unwashed costume and the contempt, Clint did something remarkable. He created an iconic character. The man with no name emerged not from Leone's direction, but from Clint's choices. The economy of movement, the quiet intensity, the way violence exploded from stillness. Everything Leone criticized about Clint's acting became the character's strengths. The television actor who didn't understand cinema was creating something that would revolutionize westerns. Leone didn't see it. During filming, he constantly complained about Clint's performance. Too still, too quiet, too nothing. In Italy, actors have passion. You're like a wooden board. When filming wrapped, Leone was convinced he'd made a masterpiece through his direction, his vision, his genius. The actor was incidental. He told the crew, "I could have put anyone in that poncho. The director makes the film. The camera makes the star." Then, A Fistful of Dollars was released in Italy in 1964. The film was a phenomenon. It revitalized the Western genre, launched the spaghetti Western movement, and made a fortune on a tiny budget. But more importantly, it made Clint Eastwood an international star. Audiences didn't talk about Leone's direction. They talked about the man with no name. They talked about the squint, the poncho, the quiet menace. They talked about Clint. Leone was furious in interviews. He tried to claim all credit for Clint's performance. "I created that character," he told Italian newspapers. "I told him every movement, every expression. Without my direction, he would be nothing. Just a tall American who cannot act." But the audience disagreed. They wanted more of the man with no name. They wanted more of Clint Eastwood. Leone, recognizing a financial opportunity, even through his ego, signed Clint for 2 more films. For a few dollars more in 1965, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in 1966. But his treatment of Clint didn't improve. If anything, it got worse. During For a Few Dollars More, Leone's contempt became more public. He gave interviews saying Clint was adequate and serviceable, but insisted the film's success came from Leone's revolutionary direction. "I am the or," he declared. "The actor is just one element, like the horse or the gun." For The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Leone made Clint wear the same poncho from the first film. Still unwashed, now filthy beyond description after 3 productions. When Clint objected, Leone dismissed him. "It's iconic now. The audience expects it. Wear it." Clint wore it, but the resentment was building. 3 films of being treated like a prop. 3 films of Leone taking all credit. 3 films of being called the tall guy and told he couldn't act. By the time The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly wrapped in 1966, Clint had become an international phenomenon. The trilogy had made him the biggest star in Europe. American distributors were clamoring for the films. Hollywood was taking notice, and Leone was planning a grand premiere. The premiere was scheduled for December 23, 1966 in Rome. It would be a major event. Politicians, celebrities, international press. Leone saw it as his coronation. The moment his genius would be recognized worldwide, Clint was invited, of course, the star of the film. But Leone made it clear through his people that this was Leone's night. The director will speak about the artistry. Leone's assistant told Clint, "Your presence is appreciated, but Sergio will present the film." Clint said nothing. He just smiled slightly. That same slight smile the man with no name used right before someone died in the films. The premiere was spectacular. The theater was packed with Rome's elite. Leone was in his element, holding court, accepting congratulations, basking in the attention. Clint stood quietly to the side, watching. When the film ended, the applause was thunderous. The audience loved it. It was clearly going to be the biggest film in the trilogy. A masterpiece of action and storytelling. Leone took the stage beaming. He began his speech in Italian, which was then translated for the international guests. "Tonight you have witnessed my vision." Leone began his voice full of pride. "For 3 films I have created a new kind of Western. I have revolutionized cinema. This character, this mysterious man came from my imagination, my direction, my camera work." He continued for several minutes, never once mentioning Clint's name. He talked about his choices, his innovations, his genius. The actor who played the role was mentioned only as my instrument and the vehicle for my vision. The audience applauded politely, but there was a growing murmur. Where was Clint? Why wasn't the star being acknowledged? Finally, the master of ceremonies, sensing the awkwardness, said, "And now perhaps we can hear from Senor Eastwood." Leon's face tightened. This wasn't part of his plan, but the audience was already applauding and Clint was walking toward the stage. Clint took the microphone. He stood there for a moment looking at Leon, then at the audience. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. That same raspy whisper Leon had mocked for 3 films. "Thank you," Clint said. "I want to thank Sergio Leone for these 3 films." Leon smiled, thinking this was a concession, an acknowledgement of his supremacy. "Sergio taught me something important," Clint continued. "He taught me that you don't need a director who respects you to create something powerful. You don't need someone who knows your name or values your contribution. Sometimes the best work comes from proving someone wrong." The audience went silent. This wasn't a typical thank you speech. "For 3 films, Sergio told me I couldn't act," Clint continued. His voice never rising but somehow filling the entire theater. "He said I was just background, just a tall guy who followed directions. He told me I understood television but not cinema, that I was a wooden board with no passion. He made me wear the same unwashed costume through all 3 films because, in his words, the actor is like the horse, a tool that doesn't need comfort, just direction." Leon's face had gone pale. This was not happening. This was his night, his triumph, his moment. This American television actor was supposed to be grateful, humble, different. "But here's what Sergio didn't understand," Clint said, his eyes locked on the director. "The reason audiences come to these films isn't the direction. It's not the camera angles or the zoom shots or the artistic vision. It's the character. It's the man with no name. And that character exists because I created him despite the director, not because of him." The audience was completely silent. Now, international press was scribbling frantically. Every choice Sergio criticized became what people loved. The stillness he called boring. The quiet he called weak. The economy of movement he called lazy. "I built this character against his vision, not from it." Clint turned directly to Leon, who was standing frozen at the edge of the stage. "You told me you make the stars, Sergio. But you were wrong. You didn't make me a star. I became a star by doing the opposite of what you wanted. The success of these films isn't because of your direction. It's despite it." The audience stirred, some gasping, some starting to whisper. This was unprecedented. A star publicly destroying his director at a premiere. "So, thank you, Sergio," Clint continued, "for showing me that I could trust my instincts over someone else's ego. Thank you for treating me terribly because it made me work harder. Thank you for taking all the credit because it showed me who I never want to become." Clint set down the microphone and walked off the stage, leaving Leon standing alone, humiliated in front of Rome's elite and the international press. The room erupted. Some applauded Clint's honesty, others were shocked by the confrontation, but everyone was talking about what had just happened. Leone tried to recover to give another speech, dismissing Clint's words as American arrogance and not understanding Italian artistry. But the damage was done. The story spread through international media. Clint Eastwood had destroyed Sergio Leone at his own premiere. The films went on to massive worldwide success, earning millions and changing cinema forever. Clint became one of the biggest stars on the planet, commanding enormous salaries and creative control. Leon continued making films, including the acclaimed Once Upon a Time in the West, but his reputation was permanently marked by Clint's speech. Every article about Leon mentioned his difficult relationship with his most famous star. Every interview included questions about Clint's accusations. Every retrospective had to address the premiere confrontation. Leon and Clint never worked together again. Leon tried to dismiss the incident, telling interviewers that Clint was ungrateful and didn't understand artistry, but the facts were clear. Clint's career had skyrocketed. Leon had stalled. Years later, before Leon's death in 1989, he was asked about Clint. His answer was telling. He became a great director. Perhaps he learned something from me after all. But those who were at that premiere in 1966 knew the truth. Clint had learned what kind of director never to be. And his revenge on Leon wasn't violence or litigation. It was success. Massive, undeniable success that proved everything Leon said about him was wrong. The unwashed poncho that Leon forced Clint to wear now hangs in a museum. One of the most iconic costumes in cinema history. Nobody remembers Leon's camera angles. Everybody remembers the man with no name. If this story of artistic vindication moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that your success isn't determined by whether someone believes in you. It's determined by whether you believe in yourself enough to prove them wrong. Have you created something great despite someone's contempt? Share your story in the comments.